The call came in at 6:47. Darnell Washington heard it the way he always heard dispatch, not as a sequence of words to process, but as a location that landed in his body before it reached his mind. Structure fire. Residential. 400 block of Caldwell Street. He was already moving before the address was complete. His hand was already on the door handle of his pickup, the key already in the ignition, the portable emergency light already coming off the rear seat where he kept it when he was off apparatus. 22 years of this work had built that kind of response in him. The address was not information. It was a signal, and the signal bypassed everything slow. He was 49 years old. He was the captain of Engine 7 at Station 4. He had been a firefighter for 22 years. Proby driver engineer, lieutenant captain. Each rank earned in the way the fire service requires things to be earned, which is through the accumulation of specific competence in conditions that do not forgive the absence of it. He had come up under captains who believed that the work is learned in the body first and in the mind second, and who taught it accordingly, running drills until the crew moved without deliberating, until the positions and the tasks were reflexive, until the knowledge was not in the head, but in the hands and the feet, and the way the eyes read smoke without being told what they are looking for. He had known he wanted to do this work since he was 11 years old. He had been on his grandmother's front porch in August watching an engine company work a house fire at the end of the block. The precision of it, the coordinated movement, the specific economy of people who know what they are doing and are doing it at the edge of what the situation allows. He had watched the crew come out with a dog and a woman in her 70s, and had felt something in his chest that he could not name at 11 but could name now, which was the certainty that some work exists at the intersection of competence and necessity, and that people who do it well are providing something that cannot be provided any other way. His mother had not been enthusiastic. She had wanted him in a field that produced predictable mornings. She had said, "You will give me a heart attack." She had said this at his Proby graduation, and then again when he made lieutenant, and again when he made captain. And by the time he made captain, she had said it without meaning it as a protest, and was instead using it as a form of endearment, the specific form that black mothers who love their children use when they are proud of something that also terrifies them. His father had worked for the electric company for 30 years, retiring as a lineman crew chief. His father had said when Darnell told him he was joining the fire service, "That is the right work for you." His father had not elaborated. He had not needed to. They were two people who communicated in short, accurate sentences, and the sentence was complete as stated. He had met his wife Angela in his 4th year. She was a physical therapist, and she understood emergency workers in the way that people who treat them come to understand them from the injuries, in which is the most honest direction of understanding. They had been married for 15 years. They had 2 daughters, Maya, 13, and Jasmine, 10. The girls came to the station for his on-duty dinners when their school schedule allowed, and sat at the long table in the apparatus bay, and drew pictures on the backs of old incident report forms, and asked the crew questions that the crew answered with the specific seriousness that grown adults bring to the serious questions of children. Priya had told him once that Maya had asked her what she was thinking about during a fire. Priya had said, "I am thinking about my job, about where I need to be and what I need to do." Maya had said, "Do you ever think about being scared?" Priya had said yes. "I think about it before and after, not during." Maya had thought about this and said that makes sense. Darnell had heard this secondhand and had not said anything to Maya about it because she had arrived at the correct understanding without his help, and the correct understanding deserved to stand on its own. He was 6'2" and broad through the shoulders, and he moved with the particular efficiency of someone who has been carrying gear and climbing stairs in fire conditions for 22 years, and who has no motion to waste. He had a scar on the left side of his jaw from a flashover in his 11th year. Not a dramatic scar, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind you notice when you're close to him. A white line running half an inch along the jaw that he had stopped explaining to people long ago, because the explanation always produced a conversation about danger, and he was not interested in conversations about danger. The danger was part of the work. The work was what he cared about. He had been returning from a training rotation. The rotation had been at the county training facility 12 miles from the station, a full-day evolution involving confined space operations and aerial ladder work, which he ran twice a year because his crew was good, and he believed that good crews get worse if they stop training the way they would like to stay good. He had driven himself to the rotation because the facility was 12 miles from the station, and the station's training apparatus was committed to a junior class drill that morning, and driving himself meant he could leave when the evolution was done rather than waiting for transport coordination. The confined space component that morning had gone well. They had done 6 evolutions, 2 rescue scenarios, and 4 preventive protocols, and Priya had set her personal best time on the 3rd rescue scenario, which was the one with the maximum restricted egress, the one that required reading the space with 0 visual field and navigating it by tactile reference alone. She had come out of the space and pulled off her SCBA and said I shaved 12 seconds. Raphael had said I clocked 11. She had said I'll take 11. Darnell had said nothing, but had noted it in his training log because a crew member shaving 11 seconds off their maximum restriction rescue time was the kind of data point that became relevant in a building you have never been in before. He had been thinking about Priya's 11 seconds on the drive back when the call came in. It occurred to him later, much later in the way that the connections between things surface long after the things themselves, that the 11 seconds Priya had cut off her personal best in the morning had mattered in the evening in the back bedroom of the house on Caldwell Street in the 30 seconds between the door opening and the window. 12 seconds faster in a confined space drill means 12 seconds faster in a confined space. The two are not separate things. He had left the training facility at 6:30. He had been on Fenton Boulevard at 6:47 when the call came across his department radio. 400 block of Caldwell Street was 8 blocks from his current position. Engine 7 coming from Station 4 was a minimum 22 blocks out. He turned immediately. He mounted the portable emergency light on the roof magnetically, the red and white strobing unit department issue rated visible at 600 yards, and he accelerated toward Caldwell Street with the light running, and his radio confirming Engine 7's response. Danny Torres on the rig with Priya and Raphael deploying in the standard order. He turned onto Caldwell Street and saw the smoke before he saw the house. The smoke was black. This was the first information. Black smoke on a residential structure in the evening means petroleum-based materials or synthetics burning in a hot, oxygen-rich environment. It means the fire has been burning long enough to consume the contents rather than just the structure. It means the fire is progressing. He read this in 2 seconds from the end of the block, and he was already revising his scene assessment, older wood frame construction. On this block, he had run a call 3 years ago. On this block, knew the housing stock, knew what balloon framing does to fire travel, knew that every minute before the crew arrived on scene was a minute he needed to be reading the structure from the perimeter to shorten the time to first water. He thought about what he needed from the perimeter. Fire location confirmed east side 2nd floor. Access points front door, rear entry windows. Exposures neighboring structures on both sides needed assessment. The gap between this house and the next was less than 8 feet on the east side, which meant the risk of fire spread to the neighboring structure was real, and a secondary line might be necessary. Occupancy. The 2 vehicles told him occupied the time of day, told him evening meal. The settled look of the block told him long-time residents who might not have escape plans. He needed all of this information, and he needed it before Engine 7 arrived because a crew arriving to a briefed captain is faster than a crew arriving to an unbriefed scene. This was the calculation he was running when Reeves's car came around the corner. The calculation was not abstract. The calculation existed in real time against the clock of a fire that was progressing while he stood on the street, and the clock did not pause because someone had decided to stop him. He positioned his truck on the right side of the street, clear of the staging lane, clear of where Engine 7 would position. He got out. He went to the truck bed and pulled the department bag, radio integration flashlight gloves, the Wildland jacket he kept as backup gear for exactly this situation. He pulled the jacket on. The jacket had his rank insignia on the chest and on the left sleeve. It had fire CAPT in 3-inch letters on the back. He clipped the radio to the jacket's loop, pulled on the gloves, and walked toward the structure. The house was the third one from the corner on the left side. 2-story wood frame over a porch across the full width of the front, with the railing at a tilt that said the house had been settling for decades. 2 cars in the driveway, a sedan and a small SUV. Both showed no damage. The fire was on the second floor on the east side. He could see the smoke pushing from under the eaves and from the east-facing windows, one of which had cracked from the heat. The front door was closed. The windows on the first floor were intact. 2 cars in the driveway. Front door closed. He keyed his radio. He said, "Engine 7, Captain Washington is on scene at 417 Caldwell. Structure fire, 2nd floor east. 2 vehicles in driveway, primary assessment in progress. Advise estimated arrival." Torres, Engine 7, 7 minutes out. Darnell, copy. Beginning perimeter assessment. He walked toward the structure. He was 30 feet from the front walk when the patrol car came around the corner. The car came fast and stopped in the middle of Caldwell Street, blocking the staging lane where Engine 7 would need to position. The officer was out of the car in the same motion that the car stopped the quick deployment of someone who has arrived at a scene and intends to take control of it. He was young, late 20s. He moved with the energy of someone who has decided in the time it took to drive down the street that the situation requires his management. His name was Kyle Reeves. He was 29 years old. He had been on the force for 4 years, the past 2 assigned to this district. His complaint history was 2 entries, both use of force inquiries, both reviewed, both closed without a formal finding. The first for insufficient evidence, and the second with a notation about proportionality that had not produced a formal action. His watch commander had written in a performance review 16 months before. Officer Reeves demonstrates a pattern of treating first responders at shared emergency scenes as subjects of law enforcement authority rather than as coordinating professionals. The watch commander had written this sentence, reviewed Reeves at the next quarterly evaluation, and not followed up on the pattern the sentence described. Reeves looked at Darnell. He looked at a black man in a jacket with rank insignia gloves on radioactive walking toward a burning building. He did not see a fire captain. "He said, sir, stop right there." Darnell stopped. He turned. He brought to this moment the patience that 22 years of emergency work produces, not the passive patience of someone who has run out of other options, but the active patience of someone who understands that the fastest way through a situation like this is precise language and complete composure, because anything that looks like urgency or frustration from a black man in a confrontational situation takes longer to resolve than what is happening right now. He said, "Captain Darnell Washington, Engine 7, Station 4. I am the first on-scene officer for this fire. My crew is 7 minutes out. I need to complete my perimeter assessment. Reeves, I need you to step back to the curb." "Darnell, officer. My identification is in this bag. My rank is on this jacket and on this sleeve. I have an active fire with 2 vehicles in the driveway, which means likely occupants. I need to be at that structure." "Reeves, step back to the curb, sir." Darnell, call dispatch. Channel 7. Ask them to confirm Engine 7's captain. They will tell you my name and my rank. Do it right now while I walk the perimeter. "Reeves, I am asking you to cooperate." Darnell, I am cooperating. I identified myself. I explained my role. I gave you a verification method. Cooperating does not mean standing at the curb while a house burns. What specific basis do you have for this request? "Reeves, there is an active emergency scene here. I need to manage who is approaching the structure." Darnell, I am the incident commander of this emergency scene. Call dispatch. Reeves moved. He stepped into Darnell's path, positioning himself on the sidewalk between Darnell and the burning structure. This was not a position that appeared in any emergency scene protocol. It was a decision made by a 29-year-old officer in the 4 seconds it had taken him to form his assessment of the man in front of him, and the assessment had not been formed from the jacket or the radio or the rank insignia or the knowledge that Engine 7 was 7 minutes out. Darnell looked at him. He looked at the house. The smoke from the second-floor windows had thickened in the 90 seconds since he had arrived. The east window had begun to show orange at the edge the fire was reaching the window. When fire reaches windows on a second floor, you have minutes before the floor becomes untenable. When you have balloon framing, you have minutes before the entire east wall structure is compromised. He thought about the 2 cars in the driveway. He thought about the child-sized sneakers he had noticed on the front porch step. He said, "There are likely occupants in that structure. Every second I stand here reduces the time available for primary search. I am the incident commander. I am telling you clearly and precisely that I need to move to that structure. If you have a regulatory basis for stopping me, state it. If you do not, step aside." "Reeves, I have not verified who you are." "Darnell, my radio is on channel 7. Your radio is the same model and the same channel. Call dispatch in the next 20 seconds. Reeves reached out. He put his hand on Darnell's arm just above the elbow. He tightened the grip immediately. This was not the open-hand gesture of a security professional guiding someone toward a different position. It was a grip. The grip of someone who had decided that grip was the appropriate response to the situation, which was a decision made without regulatory basis and without supervisor contact, and without using the radio on his belt that was on the same channel as Darnell's radio, and that he had been carrying the entire time. A neighbor from 2 houses down had come to the edge of her yard. She was an older woman, 70 or so, and she had the particular posture of someone who has been watching from her window and has decided to come outside because what she is watching requires a witness and she is available to be one. She did not say anything. She stood at the edge of her property line and she watched. Her presence was not nothing. Her presence was the presence of a witness who is not moving, and that presence had its own weight in the space. Darnell was aware of her. He was aware of the woman across the street on her phone. He was aware of the man from 3 houses down who had come to his curb. The block was becoming a record, and he was the subject of the record, and he had been in enough situations to understand that the quality of the record would matter long after this block had cleared. Darnell stood completely still. The stillness was a decision. It was the specific decision of a man who is standing on a sidewalk with a patrol officer's hand on his arm while a house burns 40 feet away, and who has 22 years of experience in the fire service, telling him that his next decision will either end this in 30 seconds or extend it by 3 minutes, and who has the judgment to know which choice is which. He was angry. The anger was precise and appropriate, and had been building since the moment Reeves said, "Stop," because he understood with the clarity that comes from 22 years of being a black man in emergency services exactly what Reeves had seen when he looked at him and exactly what Reeves had failed to see. He held the anger in the way he had learned to hold it present, registered not acted on because the house was on fire. He had held this anger many times in 22 years. Not at fires, the anger did not apply because there was no individual responsible for the fire, only the fire itself and the work it required. But in the margins of the work in the moments that existed alongside it, he had encountered the specific kind of authority that Reeves was exercising now, the authority that looks at a black man in gear with a radio and rank insignia and sees something else, something unverified and suspicious, something that requires stopping. He had been stopped in the parking lot of a hardware store buying supplies for a deck project in his own neighborhood by a patrol officer who had driven past twice before stopping. He had been followed in a grocery store by a loss prevention officer while in his off-duty clothes carrying his department bag. He had been asked at a conference in another city by a hotel security guard whether he was a guest. Each time he had done what he was doing now, identified himself, answered calmly, waited for the calculation to produce the correct conclusion. Each time, the calculation had produced the correct conclusion eventually. The cost of the eventually was the thing that accumulated. 22 years of accumulation. He was still standing on the sidewalk. The fire was still in the house. The accumulation was in him, and the fire was in the house, and neither of those facts was going away, and only one of them could wait for this to resolve. He said in the voice he used when the ceiling was coming down and clarity was the only tool available. "You have put your hand on a fire department captain at an active structure fire. Your name and badge number are visible to me. In approximately 5 minutes, my crew will arrive at this staging lane. At that point, I am going to brief them, and we are going into that building. Before that happens, I am asking you one more time. Call Dispatch Channel 7. Confirm my identity and let me do my job." "Reeves, I need you to." The woman across the street came out of her house. She was in her late 50s and a housecoat phone already in her hand. She had been watching from her front window. She was speaking into the phone as she came down her steps. She said, "There is a firefighter stopped on the sidewalk and the house across the street is on fire. I need someone to... Yes, I am at 422 Caldwell. The house across from me. There is a firefighter being blocked from going to the house." A man from 3 doors down walked to his curb. He was watching. He said, "Sir, let him go. He's a firefighter." "Let him go." Reeves did not let go. He had made a decision, and he was in it, the way that people who have made a decision in 4 seconds without sufficient information are in their decisions committed to the decision. Because acknowledging that it was wrong required a reassessment that felt more threatening than the decision itself. Darnell looked at the east side of the house. The window had fire now. The orange was full and active at the sill. The window would go in the next 2 to 3 minutes. When the window went, the fire would have fresh air and it would accelerate. When a second-floor fire gets fresh air, the rooms below it become untenable faster. He thought about the child-sized sneakers on the porch step. He said very quietly, "There is a child in that house." He did not know this for certain. He knew the sneakers on the porch step. He knew the 2 cars. He knew the evening hour. He knew the probability distribution of what those 3 facts together implied. He said it to make Reeves understand what was at stake in this sidewalk. He looked directly at Reeves when he said it. He watched Reeves's face. He had been in difficult conversations for 22 years with families of victims after a bad outcome, with insurance investigators, with city council members, asking about budget lines with his own crew after incidents that required a debrief that was going to be honest about what had gone wrong and why. He had learned to watch faces during these conversations for the specific moment when the person across from him understood something they had not understood before, not agreed with, not accepted, simply understood. The understanding and the agreement were separate steps, and the understanding had to come first. He watched Reeves's face when he said the words about the child. Something moved in Reeves's face, a small shift, the quality of someone receiving a piece of information that reorganizes the context they have been operating in. It did not produce an immediate change in his behavior. He did not let go of Darnell's arm. He did not step aside. The reorganization was happening, but it was happening inside, and it had not yet reached his hands. Darnell held his gaze. He held it for 3 seconds without speaking because he had said the relevant thing, and saying more of the relevant thing would dilute it. Engine 7 came around the corner. Danny Torres saw it from 40 yards, the apparatus turning onto Caldwell Street, and his captain standing on the sidewalk with a patrol officer's hand on his arm and the house burning 40 feet away. And he staged the rig in the only position available on the narrow residential street, which was not the ideal position, because the ideal position was blocked by the patrol car that was sitting in the middle of the road. Torres staged. Priya and Raphael were off the rig before it stopped moving, deploying the pre-connected attack line and the SCBA rack in the automatic choreography of a crew that has drilled this together enough times that thinking slows them down. Priya came to Darnell. She had been with Engine 7 for 3 years, and she had never come to a scene to find her captain's arm in an officer's grip, but she had the training and the presence to process what she was seeing without stopping forward motion. She looked at Reeves with the specific look of a professional who is not frightened of authority misapplied. She handed Darnell his SCBA harness and his turnout jacket and his radio integration unit without a word, the way you hand someone their tools when they need them. Reeves let go. He let go because the rig had arrived and 4 firefighters were now deploying equipment with the specific focused energy of a crew that does not stop. And because the woman across the street was still on her phone, and because the man from 3 doors down had moved to the edge of the sidewalk, and because the east-facing window of the house was now fully involved, and there was no version of the next 30 seconds in which Reeves's hand on Darnell's arm was going to be the narrative. Darnell had 40 seconds with his crew. He briefed them the way he always briefed them, short, specific, prioritized. He had been reading this structure for the 7 minutes he had been standing on the sidewalk, and the reading had not stopped because Reeves had stopped him. His eyes had kept working. His training had kept running its assessments on the information available. He told his crew what his eyes had gathered. 2nd floor east involved progressing to full floor timeline is tight. 1st floor smoke condition unknown. 2 vehicles in driveway confirmed occupied structure. Sneakers on front porch step, probable child location unknown. Balloon framing, consistent with housing stock. Expect fast vertical travel. Check wall voids on primary. Rear egress. There is a porch. He had seen it past the east side, which meant a secondary exit if the stairs became untenable. He assigned positions before anyone asked because the crew he had assembled did not need to be told to do things, only to be told where to do them. Torres on water supply. Raphael on the front door. Priya on the nozzle with Darnell on primary search. They had run this assignment in 83 prior structure fires. They did not need to think about the positions. They needed to execute them. He was in his gear and through the front door in 4 minutes and 31 seconds from his original arrival on Caldwell Street. He would think about this number later. 4 minutes and 31 seconds from arrival to entry. In a well-positioned structure, fire response first entry on a residential structure is targeted at 4 minutes from apparatus arrival. Engine 7 had arrived at 7 minutes after his arrival. He had been at the perimeter for 7 minutes before his crew got there. If he had been able to begin his perimeter assessment immediately on arrival without the sidewalk, he would have had 7 additional minutes of structural reading before briefing his crew. The brief would have been more complete. The crew's initial approach would have been more informed. The additional 7 minutes of perimeter observation would have been in the brief, in the assignments, in the way the entry team moved through the house. He had lost those 7 minutes to the sidewalk. The house had not waited for them. He put this calculation away because the fire was not the place for it. He went in. Older construction, 1940s balloon framing, the kind of house that was built when fire protection codes were suggestions rather than requirements. The fire had traveled from the kitchen, a stove incident they would determine in the investigation, up through the east wall cavity to the 2nd floor. The balloon framing meant the fire had a clear path from the floor to the ceiling without interruption, a continuous channel of open wood that it had used like a road. The 2nd floor east side was fully involved. The stairs were passable. They went up. The interior of the house on the way to the 2nd floor was dense with smoke. The rolling black ceiling that is the signature of a well-advanced structure. Fire the kind that makes visibility 4 inches and makes every decision a tactile and intuitive calculation rather than a visual one. Darnell had worked in 0 visibility conditions enough times that the calculation was not intimidating. It was just a different set of inputs. You feel the heat through your gear. You feel the floor through your boots. You read the air pressure, the way a room breathes tells you where the fire is traveling and which direction gives you the most time. He had trained his crew in this reading until it was reflexive. They searched the 2nd floor. 2 rooms clear. One room, the east bedroom, the one closest to the fire origin, was untenable, the floor compromised. They did not go in. The east bedroom would not have been occupied by a conscious occupant. The search continued. Third bedroom on the west side, closet bathroom. Clear. They came down the stairs. Primary was negative on the second floor. He keyed his radio, primary second floor, negative. Proceeding to first floor primary. They moved through the first floor in the configuration. They always moved through. First floor primary. Priya on the nozzle in front. Darnell reading the rooms from the doorways before they entered. Living room, clear. Front bedroom, clear. Kitchen. The origin room. The heat here still significant. The cabinets blackened and the ceiling compromised, the source of the east wall fire visible in the cavity behind the stove. Not occupied. Back hallway. He stopped. The door at the end of the hallway was closed. He crossed to it. He put his gloved hand flat on the door surface. Not hot. He put his hand on the door handle. He opened it. Priya was already moving when the door opened. Because she had read the same sequence, he had the closed door at the end of the first floor hallway, meant something had made a decision to close a door, and the only thing in a structure fire that makes decisions to close doors is a conscious person who knows what to do. Priya found the woman in the back bedroom. She was in her mid-30s on the floor, where she had been told to be and had made herself be. She had shut the door. She had laid wet towels at the base. She had kept herself and the child low. The child was beside her, 7 years old. Both of them were conscious. The smoke in the room was survivable, barely the door, and the towels had bought the time. Priya had the child in her arms in 12 seconds. Raphael had the woman. They came out through the back window onto the rear porch, which Darnell had made it to from the outside, in the time it took his crew to locate and extract, because he had read the house from the perimeter during the 40 seconds he was not held at the curb, and he had known where the back egress was. He counted them as they came through the window. 2 in, 2 out. The child was not crying. She was holding on to Priya with the specific grip of a child who has decided that the person holding her is not going to put her down, and Priya was not going to put her down, and the grip tightened when the fresh air came outside, and the child took a breath that turned into 4 breaths, and then a sound that was not crying but was close to it, in the way that the body releasing tension is close to the sound of grief. Darnell stood on the rear porch and counted the 2 of them, and then looked at the house, and then looked at his crew. Raphael had the woman stabilized, crouched beside her on the porch steps with her oxygen mask in place, talking to her in the low, steady voice he used with people who needed to stay calm, while everything around them was not calm. Torres had the second line running on the east exposure, keeping the neighbor structure wet, which was what the situation required, and which Torres had read from the apparatus approach before Darnell had assigned it. The fire in the structure was being knocked back. He could hear it in the way the sound of the fire had changed, the deep roar diminishing, the ventilation work beginning to have its effect. He thought about the sneakers on the porch step. He had seen them when he first walked up the front path, child-size pink with Velcro closures. He had noted them in the same way he noted the 2 vehicles and the closed front door and the smoke pattern from the eaves as information about the probability of what was inside. He had named it to Reeves. He had said, "There is a child in that house." Reeves had not responded to this sentence in any way that Darnell could observe. The sentence had been offered, and it had not changed anything in the moment it was offered. It had simply become part of the record. The child in the rear bedroom was named Savannah. He learned this from the paramedic who learned it from the mother. Savannah was 7. She had done exactly what her mother told her to do. She had gotten down, she had stayed down, she had held her mother's hand while the towels were placed at the base of the door. She had been told by someone at some point in her 7 years that if there is a fire, you get low and you stay. She had retained this instruction and applied it in the moment it was required. The instruction had been correct. She had applied it correctly. Both of these facts had mattered enormously. The woman had smoke inhalation. She was treated on scene and transported. The child showed no clinical signs of inhalation exposure. She was transported for precautionary evaluation and cleared within 2 hours. Darnell walked back to where Kyle Reeves was standing. He had been standing at the edge of the staging area for 51 minutes. He had not left. He had the look of someone who has spent 51 minutes understanding what the next part of this day is going to be. He had not been alone in those 51 minutes. The woman in the housecoat from across the street, Dolores Hutchins, he would learn her name later, had stayed at her curb after her phone call. She had watched the crew work the fire. She had watched the extraction through the back of the house. She had watched Darnell come back around from the rear porch and walk toward the apparatus. She had watched all of this with the specific attention of someone who is making sure she has seen everything and will be able to say exactly what she saw if she is asked. The man from 3 doors down had also stayed. He was in his 60s with his arms folded and the expression of someone who has decided he is not going inside until he has seen how this ends. Both of them looked at Darnell when he came back around from the rear. He looked at them. He nodded once, the specific nod of acknowledgement that requires no elaboration. They had done the right thing by staying visible and by speaking up. He did not know yet that Dolores Hutchins had also been recording on her phone. She had started recording after her dispatch call and had captured the last 2 minutes of the Reeves interaction and the full Engine 7 arrival. He would find this out in the investigation when her statement arrived with a video attachment. Her footage showed what the car camera had shown from a different angle, which is to say from the perspective of a neighbor who had come out of her house because she had decided that the situation required a witness and had made herself one. Darnell said, 2 occupants, woman and child, both alive, both going to be all right. He said this first. He said it not to reassure Reeves, but to state the outcome that had been produced by a crew that knew what it was doing and that had been delayed by the man standing in front of him. He wanted Reeves to understand that the outcome was the outcome in spite of the sidewalk, and not because of anything Reeves had done. He wanted this to be clear and present and specific. He did not want it to be ambiguous. The 2 people from the back bedroom were alive. They were alive because Engine 7 had done its work correctly, and because Cheryl Moore had known to close the door, and because Priya had been 11 seconds faster in confined space rescue after the morning's training. They were not alive because of the 7 minutes and 12 seconds on the sidewalk. They were alive in spite of those 7 minutes and 12 seconds. The distinction was not academic. In a structure fire with balloon framing 7 minutes is not an abstraction. 7 minutes is the difference between a contained second-floor fire and a fully involved first-floor fire. 7 minutes is the difference between a passable staircase and an impassable one. He had been a firefighter for 22 years and he knew what 7 minutes was, and he wanted Reeves to know that he knew. He said it without saying it. He said it by stating the outcome plainly and then pausing for 3 seconds before he said the next thing, which gave Reeves the time to do the arithmetic. Then he said, "Tell me your watch commander's name and contact." Reeves said Sergeant Harold Graham. Darnell said, "Call him. Tell him you need to be on scene at 417 Caldwell Street before I have to leave to file my incident report." He walked to the apparatus. He picked up his radio and filed his first verbal incident report while his crew finished the knockdown. He described the fire origin travel suppression approach extraction outcome. He described separately and specifically the delay on the sidewalk. He described the duration. He described the physical contact. He described the position of the patrol car blocking the staging lane and the impact on apparatus positioning. He described the badge number he had memorized in the first 30 seconds of the interaction, because 22 years in this work had given him the habit of memorizing badge numbers the way other people memorize exit routes. Sergeant Harold Graham arrived in 23 minutes. He was a compact man in his late 40s, 21 years on the force, with the specific quality of a supervisor who has reached a point in his career where he no longer deliberates about what a situation requires before doing it. He shook Darnell's hand. He said, "Captain Washington." He listened for 9 minutes without interrupting. He asked 3 questions when Darnell finished. All 3 questions were clarifying rather than challenging. Then he walked to where Reeves was standing. Darnell did not hear what Graham said to Reeves. He was at the apparatus, completing his scene documentation. He did not need to hear it. What Graham said was Graham's responsibility. What had happened on this street was now in the record, and the record was going to speak for itself. He completed the incident report at the apparatus, and then he completed the addendum, the specific additional documentation that the department required when an emergency responder encountered interference with their emergency duties. He had never filed this addendum before. He had filed the standard incident report form 843 times in 22 years. He had never before Caldwell Street needed to document that his approach to an active fire scene had been physically obstructed by another public safety officer. He read the addendum form carefully. He filled it out with the same precision he brought to every document that went into the record dates. Times badge numbers, specific words, used specific physical contact described. He described the 7 minutes and 12 seconds. He described the patrol car in the staging lane. He described the east window going fully involved at the 6-minute mark, and what that meant for fire progression in balloon-framed construction. He filed the addendum with the standard incident report. He handed the complete package to his battalion chief at the apparatus at 8:17 that evening, 1 hour and 30 minutes after the call had come in at 6:47. The internal affairs investigation opened within 48 hours. The assigned investigator was a lieutenant named Sarah Cho, who had conducted 43 internal investigations in 11 years, and who approached each one with the same methodology. Build the timeline from the available evidence. Compare the timeline to the applicable protocols. Find the gap between them, explain the gap. She built the Caldwell Street timeline in 2 days. She placed every data point on a master document in chronological order. The 6:47 dispatch. Darnell's on-channel response at 6:48. His arrival on scene at 6:51. The patrol car's arrival at 6:52. The first verbal identification at 6:52 and 30 seconds. The physical contact at 6:55, Engine 7's arrival at 6:59 and 12 seconds. The extraction at 7:23. The fire knockdown complete at 7:29. She put the full interaction duration in a separate line, 7 minutes and 12 seconds from first contact to Engine 7 arrival. 7 minutes and 12 seconds in which a credentialed emergency responder with active radio access was unable to reach the structure he was assigned to assess. She compared the timeline to the emergency scene coordination protocol. The protocol required radio verification before physical escalation. Reeves's radio log showed 0 outbound calls during the interaction window. She noted this in the investigation file with the word determinative. She reviewed the 2 prior use-of-force inquiries and identified the pattern element. She wrote in the case notes a pattern review after the second complaint would have produced supervisory action before this incident. The absence of the pattern review is a contributing factor. She flagged the supervisory chain for review. The supervisory review produced its own findings. Reeves's watch commander had written the 16-month-old performance note and had not followed up. His lieutenant had reviewed the second complaint and had not read it alongside the first. The department's pattern review trigger, which required a supervisory conference after 2 complaints of the same type within 18 months, had not been applied because the complaints had been classified under different administrative codes, one as use of force and one as conduct, and the system did not cross-reference across codes automatically. The gap was administrative. It was a gap that a person with good judgment and time would have caught. No one with the combination of good judgment and time had reviewed Reeves's file between the second complaint and Caldwell Street. The investigation noted this. The administrative code system was reviewed and revised to cross-reference complaint types that involved the same officer within a 36-month window, regardless of classification code. This change was administrative and invisible. It would not appear in any training material or policy posting. It would simply change the way the system flagged files. Cho noted it in her investigation summary as a structural correction to a process gap. She was careful about her language. The correction was specific and documented. She did not describe it as anything more than what it was. The gap at 417 Caldwell Street was not difficult to find. The radio log confirmed that Darnell Washington had responded on Channel 7 as Engine 7 Captain at 6:47 before arriving on scene in clear department language that identified his rank, his unit, and his intent. The log showed that Reeves had his radio active and on channel during the interaction. He had not called dispatch. His log showed no outbound calls between his arrival on Caldwell Street and the arrival of Engine 7. He had stood on a sidewalk for 7 minutes with a radio in working order and had not used it to verify the identity of the man whose arm he was holding. Cho reviewed the car camera footage. The footage showed the full interaction, Darnell's identification of himself at the beginning. The rank insignia visible throughout the repeated request for Reeves to call dispatched the physical contact, the woman across the street coming out with her phone, the man from 3 doors down. The footage showed the east window of the house going fully involved at the 6-minute mark of the interaction. It showed Engine 7 arriving at 7 minutes and 12 seconds. Cho reviewed the 2 prior complaint files. She compared them. Both involved first responders at emergency scenes. She wrote in her case notes prior complaints reflect identical pattern. Pattern review was not conducted after second complaint. No supervisory action was taken on the performance note from 16 months prior. The investigation's finding was formal and specific. Officer Reeves had stopped a credentialed emergency responder at an active fire scene without regulatory basis. He had failed to use available communication resources to verify the responder's identity. He had applied physical restraint to the responder without justification. He had blocked the staging lane with his patrol vehicle impacting apparatus positioning. The pattern reflected in prior complaints and the supervisory performance note indicated a conduct issue that had not been addressed through available administrative mechanisms. Reeves was suspended without pay for 45 days. He was required to complete the Joint Emergency Scene Coordination training before return to active duty. The training that explained with specific protocols and regulatory citations what the relationship between law enforcement and fire command authority looks like at an active emergency scene and why. He was required to attend 4 sessions. He attended all 4. His grievance was denied at the first level at the second level and abandoned before the third. The fire department's liaison office and the police department's training division developed a joint emergency scene protocol. They had been discussing developing one for 2 years, with the specific bureaucratic friction that joint protocol development produces when 2 agencies have different cultures and different command structures. The Caldwell Street incident provided what the 2-year discussion had not a specific documented formal finding that identified the absence of the protocol as a contributing factor to a measurable adverse outcome at an active emergency scene. Chief Marcus Webb signed the joint protocol. Chief Diane Okafor signed it. It was posted in every apparatus bay in the district and in every patrol car. It was added to the annual Joint Emergency Response Training curriculum. It said in plain language what it needed to say: a fire department captain at an active structure. Fire holds incident command authority. Law enforcement officers operating at the same scene operate in coordination with incident command. Verification of fire command personnel is accomplished by radio contact with dispatch, not by unilateral officer assessment. The protocol was 4 pages and contained no ambiguity. Darnell attended the signing. He stood in the fire chief's conference room with Chief Webb and Chief Okafor and 3 members of the liaison committee and watched the 2 chiefs sign the document and felt in that moment what he always felt when something came out of something difficult and produced something that would matter. Not satisfaction exactly, and not vindication in the conventional sense, but the specific knowledge that the record was now complete and the record would do its work. Angela had come to the signing. She was not officially part of any aspect of the process. She was a physical therapist, and this was a fire department and police department administrative proceeding. She came because Darnell had mentioned it over dinner the night before, and she had said, "I am coming." He had not argued. He had been with her for 15 years, and he knew the voice in which she said things that were not open for discussion. She sat in the back of the conference room and said nothing while the document was signed. Afterward, while Darnell spoke with Chief Webb, she stood in the corner with the specific composure of a person who has been managing her own experience of something for weeks, and who is relieved that the formal part is now complete. He had come home from Caldwell Street and told her what had happened over the kitchen table with their daughters at school and the kitchen quiet, and she had listened to the whole thing without interrupting, and at the end she had said, "How long were you at the curb?" He had said 7 minutes and 12 seconds. She had said nothing for a moment, and then she had said, "The house is all right and the people in the house are all right." He had said yes. She had said, "Then we start from that and we do what comes next." What came next was the complaint, the investigation, the protocol development, the signing. She looked at him across the conference room after the signing was complete, and he looked back at her, and the look they exchanged was the look of 2 people who have been married for 15 years and know what the last several weeks have cost, and know that the cost was worth it, and know also that cost is not the same as acceptable. Maya and Jasmine did not know the full story. They were 13 and 10. They knew that something had happened at a fire, and that their father had filed a complaint, and that it had produced a new rule. Maya had asked if it was a rule like the rules at school. Darnell had said it is like a school rule, except that the consequence for breaking it is much more serious, and the reason for the rule is much more serious. She had thought about this and said, "Did the person break the rule?" He had said yes. She had said, "Is there a consequence?" He had said yes. She had said good. Then that's how it should work. He had thought about this for a long time after she said it. She was right. That is how it should work. The rule exists. The rule is broken. The consequence is applied. The rule is reinforced by both the consequence and by being made into a more explicit requirement going forward. This is the theory. The theory is correct. The difficulty is in the gap between the theory and the practice, which is the gap that the 7 minutes and 12 seconds on Caldwell Street had occupied. The gap was being closed. It was being closed through documentation and protocol and administrative process, which were the tools available. They were not perfect tools. They were the tools that existed, and the work of people who believed in the record was to use them as precisely as possible. He believed in the record. He had believed in it for 22 years. He had one more thing to say, and he said it before he left the conference room. He said the woman on the phone across the street. "I want her name in the case file." She was on her phone calling for help before I asked her to be. Without her and the neighbor at the curb, the lobby witness record is thinner. He said this because it was true, and because he believed in giving credit to the people who did the right thing without being asked to, because those people are not always visible in formal records, and they should be. The woman's name was Dolores Hutchins. Her name was added to the case file's witness section. The woman from the back bedroom sent a note to Engine 7 6 weeks after the fire. Her name was Cheryl Moore. She had been in the hospital for 12 days with smoke inhalation, not severe, but the kind that requires time and rest and does not clear quickly. Savannah had gone home the same day. Cheryl had spent 12 days thinking about the bedroom door and the towels and the 64 seconds. She wrote the note by hand. It was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph thanked the crew by name. She had learned all 4 names from the station's department website and had written them out carefully, getting each one exactly right. Darnell Washington, Priya Nair, Rafael Gutierrez, Danny Torres. The second paragraph described what she remembered of the extraction Priya coming through the window, the sound of Priya's voice saying, "Come with me right now," the feeling of the outside air after the closed room. The third paragraph was the one about the seconds. She wrote, "I started counting when I heard your engine come around the corner because counting gave me something to do while I waited. I counted 64 seconds from when I heard the engine to when the window opened. I told myself 64 seconds is not so long, and it wasn't. But I want you to know that I counted them." Darnell read the note 4 times. She did not know what those 64 seconds had contained. She did not know about the 7 minutes and 12 seconds that had preceded them. She knew 64 seconds from the engine sound to the window opening, and she had told herself not so long. He read this and thought about the 7 minutes and 12 seconds and what they would have added up to if the bedroom door had been open instead of closed, or if Savannah had been on the second floor instead of the first floor, or if Cheryl Moore had not known the specific correct actions to take in a room filling with smoke. He thought about 64 seconds and what they had been made to contain, and what they could have been required to contain if the sequence had been different by any of the variables that a structure fire offers. He put the note in the drawer. He kept it in the desk drawer at the station, in the drawer where he kept the things that were part of the record of why the work mattered. He had 2 years of notes in that drawer. He added Cheryl Moore's. He also kept a copy of the joint protocol in the same drawer because he had asked Chief Webb for a signed copy, and Webb had given him one without asking why he wanted it, which was correct because Webb knew why he wanted it. He wanted it because it was the document that came out of Caldwell Street. It was the document that said in the language of formal policy what the event had demonstrated. He had been building documents like this for 22 years. Incident reports, investigation files, training records, outcome data. He believed in them the way he believed in the checklist. Before you enter a structure, the checklist does not make you safer by magic. It makes you safer by requiring you to know before you go in what you need to know. The document does not change the culture by magic. It changes the culture by requiring in writing that the culture behave differently. The culture is changed one document at a time. He knew this. He had known it for 22 years. He added the protocol to the drawer alongside the note, and he closed the drawer. He had one more thing to do before he went home. He went to the training log and he entered Priya's 11-second improvement in the confined space rescue timing because it belonged in the record and because he had been carrying it in his head since the training facility that morning, and because the record was the record. He entered it with the date and the scenario number and the elapsed time. He noted that the improvement had been achieved on the maximum restriction protocol, the one that produced the most reliable real-world application. He noted in the same entry that Engine 7 had conducted an active structure fire rescue on the same day as the training evolution and had achieved occupant extraction on a maximum restriction first-floor rear bedroom in conditions consistent with the confined space protocol. He noted training and application same calendar day. The training was relevant. He closed the training log. He went back to work because Engine 7 had a training evolution scheduled in the morning, and the evolution was not going to run itself. He went to the training log and closed it and went home. Angela was at the kitchen table when he came in. She had a cup of tea and a book open on the table, and she looked up when he came through the door with the look she had for him at the end of long days, which was the look that said, "You are home, and I am glad. And I am not going to require more from you tonight than the fact of you being in this kitchen." He sat down across from her, and she poured him tea from the pot. And they sat for a while without talking, which was one of the things that 15 years of marriage had built between them, the capacity to be in the same room with something difficult and to sit with it without requiring it to resolve faster than it could resolve. He said eventually, 2 people alive. She said, "I know." He said, "That's the one I keep returning to." She said, "That's the right one to return to." Some things that are built over 22 years in a fire station cannot be assessed correctly from the window of a patrol car in 4 seconds. The 22 years are not in the jacket. They are in the decisions which buildings to read from the perimeter, which assignments to give before anyone asks which windows to go through and which ones to stage below. You do not stop those decisions at the curb and expect the house to wait. The house has never waited. Not once in 22 years. Not on Caldwell Street. Not for anything. Subscribe our channel. We tell the stories of the people who go in when the smoke is black and what comes out on the other side when they do.